There we go. I like that. Like it.
Got to be the 4? No problem.
Hey, welcome to Last Call 76. I'm Seth and with me here is my friend Dan O'Brien.
Welcome to Last Call 76. We look forward to having a good time with you at our bar.
This is going to be a great hang. It's us hanging out, telling stories, learning about each other, and having just a great time. There's no nonsense here, no politics. This is just us hanging out and with your new military friends, Dan and Seth, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So quickly, just about me, since we're getting to know each other for the first time. I'm a 28-year-plus Special Forces colonel. I just retired. I had a fantastic career. I really dug it. I focused in the Middle East and Central Asia, and it was an absolute ball. Now, people always ask me, hey, what's the difference between a Green Beret and a Navy SEAL? Because they see SEALs in TV shows and movies, and God bless them, you know, they've done a very good job of branding themselves. I always tell folks that, look, if you're in special operations, you've got your own special job. We don't compete with the SEALs, we complement them. We all do various different things to make sure that special operations works well. And so for Green Berets, what we do, besides the cool commando and kicking in doors and jumping out of airplanes, we're the premier guerrilla warfare experts, the irregular warfare experts. What we do is we go through a 2-year, very hardcore training pipeline, and part of that is learning a language, getting cultural training, and then becoming those guys that can either create guerrilla armies to overthrow countries, or we can help countries to not get overthrown by insurgents. And we work all over the world with our partners, which is absolutely great. So for example, if we're going into Afghanistan in 2001, we overthrow the Taliban government, or if we're helping the Iraqi government to not be overthrown by the Al-Qaeda guys. So that's what we do overall, and it's a wonderful career. I really enjoyed it. You know, the great experiences. I've been in the invasion of Afghanistan. I was one of the first guys in. I did the Horn of Africa, low visibility. I did Iraq, pre-surge, surge, post-surge. And I spent the last 3 years as the Chief of Staff for all special operations in the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, which has been an absolute ball. And I'll tell you, when you look at what we do, I always get a kick because people ask me about like beards and things like that. I'm like, look, our cultural piece, when we went in Afghanistan, we grew beards because that's what the Afghani men wanted to see. You showed up, they expected men and warriors to look like that. When we showed up in Iraq, they needed to see a clean-cut army, and that's how we sort of switched ourselves. The other thing that sets us apart from special operations, there's 12 Special Forces Green Berets on a team. And when they go in, we build this army out, you know, call it either a guerrilla army, or we work with commandos and build those out. So that when we show up on an objective, instead of having just 12 rifles, now we've got over 100 rifles that show up. And the guys that we train probably grew up in those neighborhoods and knew the people. So we've got this local expertise that's with us. So that's what I bring to the table from a military side. I look forward to telling you guys some great stories and insights to help explain current events or things that happened in the past. And today in this episode, I'm going to hit you with the war story at the end that I think is really going to blow your hair back. Last thing I'll say about myself, I'm a proud dad of 3 kids. I've grown up and lived all over the United States, and I was a very mediocre football player in a very bad Tulane team back in the day, and look forward to telling you some fun stories there. So that's me, Dan.
Well, I'm Dan O'Brien. Welcome to the bar. And I was a command sergeant major for 28 years in the military as well. I fortunately got to serve in Germany. I got to serve in Korea. Got to go as well to Africa, where you went on a mission in the Senegal for the President of the United States. I also was a military police for the majority of my career until you and I got together as a command team. I've also did a bunch of other State Department Secret Service missions, and I think we have a lot to add as a team. We did this before, so this is nothing new, and I'm looking forward. But more than that, congratulations for your service. I think it's very important that we thank each other as brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
And it means a lot to us. So cheers to you.
Cheers, my friend. This is going to be a blast. And look, you're hanging with a couple of guys that worked together for 2 years as a command team. We've got a lot of interest I think you're going to love too. Besides just that insight into this military lifestyle, which I think a lot of people don't quite understand, we bring sports, entertainment. Dan's got a ton of business experience with UFC, NASCAR. It just it's going to be a really cool hang. So we can't wait to share that time with you. We're going to inform, educate, we're going to laugh. We'll hit some serious subjects too that I think you'd really be interested in hearing about. And it's part of our hang here at Studio One here with Last Call 76.
Hey, Seth, I got to tell you, man, I'm having a great time. After all this work that we put in, we're finally making this happen. Hey, cheers, brother.
Absolutely, Dan. This is a great time and a blast. And to all of our new friends, I salute you as well. Thank you. You know what's great about this first show is we get a chance to really connect with our audience, but we wanted to do this last week. But we had a really incredible thing happen here. Not good incredible either. We had a big hurricane come in and hit central and southern Florida. And it affected our life. And I know from my perspective, you know, we watched this in Tampa and the hurricane started rolling towards us. I live on the military base as I'm getting my retirement ready, and we had to evacuate. And of course, as it always turns out, I went from being in the way of the hurricane, we moved to Orlando, and then the hurricane followed us and literally went right over the top of our hotel. So my wife, 3 kids, dog, all got caught in the eye of the hurricane there as it came through. But you know, it could have been a lot worse. I've got an uncle down in Fort Myers, and those guys really took it right in the chin, and it's really horrible. And you know, he's lucky in the sense he just got his power back today, about a week later. But there's so many people that are suffering there that we need to help support over the next probably year plus as we recover. So how about you, Dan? How did it go for you?
Well, we were in the same boat as you. We were told to evacuate. We were loaded up, ready to go, and then the storm shift, and we decided to go and then come back.
Yeah. Just
because of the fact that I knew we had some guys that were going to get down there immediately and help out.
Yeah.
So we were really prepared to do it here.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had the RV, so I was in a position where I could go out and help people immediately. So
you guys went down to the sound of the gun, so to speak, and went down to help those folks out.
Well, you know, we
That's
tried.
Awesome.
And the neighbor right over here next door, he's got the low motor boat.
Yeah.
So he was able to get in there immediately in the streets and everything else. And so there's about 20 people.
That's great.
Involved in all that. And I got Nick Perdermo, who I did the Bahamas with.
Yeah.
He immediately jumped because he's down in the Miami area.
Yeah.
And he shot across just to take care of some veterans in the mobile home park that washed away. Yeah. And he did a great job. He's a former military policeman. He still is a military policeman, but in the Guard.
Yeah.
And but then anyway, so that happened, and we came back here, and then we got blessed. But then a lot of friends from my high school reached out to me, or from my church.
Yeah.
And there were some parents that were missing. So,
wow.
And then after dealing with this last year in Louisiana, and a few years ago in the Bahamas, it's catastrophic, to say the least, right? And it affects so many people, and it's just it's sad. Yeah. I mean, you want to say you're fortunate that it missed you, but at the same time, you have so many loved ones down there that, you know, friends, family, aunts, and uncles, like you're talking about. And it's like sometimes you feel helpless because you can only move so fast because the freedom of movement is just not there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what's really interesting is when you saw all the first responders start to flood the area afterwards, you saw, you know, not just the National Guard, but you saw electricians, you saw all the journeymen that were driving down in their trucks, getting ready to try to bring power back and help everybody that's in there. But when you see the scale and scope of the damage there, you just begin to realize how big of an effort this is. But I'll tell you what, salute every single person and organization that went down there and that's still working right now to get there. And we'll have some codes and things at the end of our show for the Red Cross, some other organizations, and to really get after it. In fact, I remember I was watching the Bucs game this weekend and saw Florida Strong, but I think you were at the Bucs game, right?
I was. They reached out to me. They wanted to do a little celebration of gold, you know, of the American flag and the national anthem, and they wanted to do a few gold stars, a few active service members, a few active community members that, you know, work with the volunteers, you know, from schools or whatever. So we got picked for it, and then I took Jason along, who his uncle also died in Vietnam. So I thought it'd be a great thing for him to represent his uncle as well as William, my brother, and so that was great in that sense. But it was sombering because the whole stadium was pretty much, it was a pin drop because they wore the Florida Strong. You saw that, and the whole team got behind it, and they were down in Miami the whole week.
Right.
And then the game it was going to get canceled. It was going to be moved up to Minnesota or somewhere along those lines.
Right.
It was a neutral location. And then fortunately they were able to play the game here. So we got to do that. We got to see some of the players, but it was just a very, I mean, the players were pumped, to play the game, but they were generally cared for what was really going on down there. And then, like I said, some of the players like Tom Brady, they initiated a fund.
Excellent.
And then the Bucs jumped on, and I think even some of the Chiefs did as well. So for what it is, for as bad as it is, to see those guys totally change.
Absolutely.
They had a game to play. We didn't do so well as Bucs, but overall, I was impressed by the way they handled the situation, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's great when you see things that transcend the game. People want to go there to watch football. And as much as I don't want to watch that evil magician Patrick Mahomes just making things happen out there, he is very entertaining to watch as long as he's not playing against your team. It was really awe-inspiring and humbling to see everyone come together and think about something much larger than a game, than the entertainment business, and it was really, really fun to watch. So, good for you to represent Gold Star families, because we've got a lifetime of support for those Gold Star families. Great on the NFL for highlighting the needs of our friends and family down south that are going to have a long way to go. So well done. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, Dan, look, I'm checking out my glass. There might be a crack in the bottom of it because it seems to be running out pretty quick. So we're coming up close in the next round. So I'm going to hit you up, my friend, on the military tradition of the coin. And because if you don't have a military coin on you, my friend, you're buying the next round.
Are we really going to do that?
We're doing that.
On our first show.
On the first show! Calling you out. What do you got?
All right. Well, guess what there, Seth? I got just the answer for that. But I'm pulling out this 463rd military police coin from Iraq. And it looks a little bit more solid warrior than your coin, even though that's a higher command coin.
Talk to me about the coin. Why is this important to you?
So this coin's important to me because when we got there, we didn't really have an identity.
And we being your unit, military unit in Iraq?
Yes, and so we had an identity, but we wanted to make ourselves cool.
Yeah.
And we were out in the streets of Baghdad, Mansour, running down, screaming ladies every day, doing patrols. So I decided to sit down and design that coin.
That's awesome.
And it just so happens to be today, the reason I bought that coin is because we were looking for a producer.
Yeah.
And we got Jessica out of the 463rd that just so happens to live in this area. And so I'm actually going to dedicate, while you buy me a drink, I'm going to dedicate this coin to her because she was a part of the unit and she was there when we developed this. And there was another amazing soldier that painted a mural that we will show that is amazing on a T-wall in Iraq. So good on you, good try, but not today.
Well, here you go. I will drink to Jessica, to the unit, and to you thinking one step ahead of me as usual as the Command Sergeant Major. So well done. All right. Hey, Dan, I got a question for you. So, and this thing's been bugging me because I've seen it in the news, and I think it goes right down your wheelhouse. When you retired, your business, you got plugged in with NASCAR, you got plugged in with UFC, which are sports that I like, but I'll be the first to admit I'm not an expert in them. And the subject there is UFC fighters and their pay. Because there's a discussion that's going on out there right now. Are they getting paid what they should get paid? And look, I'll be the first to admit this is a sensitive topic to me because when I was playing college football, colleges would make a ton of money every year on these football games, but the college football players, when you actually broke it down, were not getting paid even minimum wage for what they were supposed to do. So this is something that's always bugged me. I'm really interested in your thoughts and your expertise. What do you think of the UFC fighters and the pay issue?
Well, that is a tough one.
That's why I asked.
Right. So thanks for that one.
You're welcome.
I think it's a two-part approach.
Yeah.
And I think where people get lost in it a little bit because the media portrays it a little bit different from the fighter perspective, from the owner perspective.
Yeah.
What I will say first is I think what Dana White's done with that organization, from what it was from Colorado in like 1990.
Butterbean, baby.
To
the good days.
Tank Abbott's, the Gracies, and everything else. I will say this. Do I think there's room for improvement? Perhaps. But I don't know the numbers.
Yeah.
Because I'm not involved at that. I just have a couple buddies of mine, like the Coltons, the Tim Kennedys, you know, the Ray Rodriguez's.
Guys that you know personally, that you've worked with in your business.
And we did some training camps together, what have you, up in Albuquerque. But I guess in short, I would just define it as this. It's, you kind of know, because it's public knowledge, a lot of guys come in on a 12.
Yeah.
You know, it's a 12 and 12 get. So it's 12,000 a show.
Okay.
And it's 12,000 to win.
Okay.
But there's also potentially a bonus hanging out there, so to speak.
Okay.
So you have a fight of the night, you have the knockout of the night, and then you have the submission of the night. So you could take, if you're overly impressive in your fight,
yeah,
you could take that 24,000 right there and put yourself in a great position to potentially grab that bonus from Dana.
And what is that bonus, generally speaking? Any idea what that is?
It's about 50K.
50. Yeah, that's
50K.
That's a nice check.
But the problem is, there's generally anywhere from like, I don't know, 10 to 15 fights per card. So that's what. So if you ever watch the UFC, and what's become so amazing about it is, what used to be a game of what we used to call inches.
Yeah.
It's like a game of millimeters now. You know, and these guys are so equally matched in so many ways about their fighting styles.
They're so technically proficient. When you go back and look at those early fights you were talking about before, and you look at how technically proficient they are now, it's almost like it's two different sports. I mean, how much in your mind, I mean, talk about some of those changes and some of those details.
Well, I think so. The argument is, just from what I know, and I got guys right here in the Bay Area that are trying to get in there now. So I'm involved in that aspect, but I'm just not personally involved with those guys anymore, because Colton's still, you know, he's got a gym now. I'm very proud of him for that. And I was proud of him for his UFC stuff.
And you guys were partners with...
we're also business partners, and we'll go down that later. But I think my idea on it is, when I look at it, it's one of those things that, if you looked at the NFL, if that's fair.
Yeah, okay, let's compare them.
So, and you brought it up about the NCAA.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just try to simplify it for everybody, if that makes sense. And what I'll say is, while those NCAA players are filling 100-person stadiums, they're making tons of money.
I was at the Alabama game 2 weeks ago. 110,000 people in there. It's wild. I mean, it's a heck of a thing.
So when you look at it from this lens, just my lens, I would sit there and say, I think the UFC players or fighters are getting paid pretty good in the sense that they also bring a skill. So this is where a lot of people get off track a little bit. Some of these guys already worked at the gym. They're already professional fighters. They've been fighting in other organizations.
Okay.
So a lot of them already have their gym title, who they're fighting under, where they're at out in the American top team.
Are those like sponsorships, would you call that, or is it
they're
different?
Not necessarily sponsorships, but they represent those gyms.
Okay.
So like you have American Kickboxing Academy down in San Diego.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or whatever. So what ends up happening is these guys have been there a long time. They've been trained up by these same coaches for years.
Interesting.
So ultimately, they work there, they do seminars, so they supplement their income in some way or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
And then they train as well, like kids' classes and everything.
Yeah, they're coaching themselves, making.
Right.
Okay.
So to get back to my point, I don't know the 100% answer. But I know it's a performance-based sport. So as we know, though, just recently, if you watched the Awesome Contender Series, you had Bo Nickel come out of there. That's never been really a fighter, but a Penn State world champion. I mean, he's amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So now he's trying to, you know, do some of the marketing stuff. But anyway, you know, to make himself better for the fights.
Yeah, as you should. I would say that's probably
But I'm
smart.
going to go a little longer here just because I want to make a point.
Yeah.
I want to kind of define it. And then Dana White signs his first 17-year-old. Yeah. Most likely he'll fight his next professional fight as an 18-year-old in the UFC because his birthday is right around the corner. But what I'm getting at is, so those kids are starting to get paid professional fees, you know, like getting paid. while those football players in college have to graduate high school as a requirement, and then they have to expire their 3 years of eligibility. So when you look at it that way, you come into UFC as, for instance, I just mentioned a 17-year-old. Well, he's got 4 years on that kid, and then you start to hear, well, the league minimums in the NFL, I think this year is $710,000. But if you broke it out by fight to game, it's about 35 grand with the Venom kit, maybe 40 grand. You know, the Venom kit is basically what the UFC fighters are wearing, and they get paid based by how good they are, what their draw is, right? So, but everybody has to wear Venom.
Okay.
So they get that cut as well. So now the pro football player finally goes through the combine, finally goes to rookie camp, and finally gets paid. And then they can only get so much now. Remember, before they couldn't. So it's so hard to look from the business side to the fighter side when that sport in the NFL is kind of the only one that says you have to exhaust all 3 years of eligibility through the NCAA before you can even go to the combine or enter to the draft.
Yeah, that's really interesting watching those guys, those young guys coming up, because they've got that lead, that probably 4-year lead on making money before an NFL player can go. And I realize maybe it's comparing apples and washing machines between the NFL and the UFC, but still, it's fascinating when you look at what the sport's become. I mean, just the nutrition alone, I mean, and the conditioning these guys are in now over the last 20 plus years is amazing. I mean, can you, I know you've cornered some guys and things. What is that, what have you seen in that?
Well, it's what I was talking about before. So it went from a game of inches or feet to millimeters. So now, like most UFC fighters.
What does that mean? Is it because it's just the competition's so tight?
It's so tight, right? I mean, you can't make a mistake anymore, right? So what happens is then you get dietitians, you get nutritionists, right? Then you get athletic coaches, and then you get your fitness coaches, your cardio coaches, or whatever you're bringing to the table. Just keeping it simple. And I'll tell you, as a matter of fact, it's a perfect time for me to tee up one of our great sponsors because, hey, look, these guys trusted in us before we even had a show. And they're with Colton. They're with one of our former senior sergeant majors, Troxel. And they jumped on board for us because
phenomenal product.
And you know what? A lot of soldiers use this, but since I've had it in my hands, a lot of our pros and a lot of our athletes around in the neighborhood, they really like this product. And I mean, their mission is to get it in the soldier's hand and in the warrior's hands, right? The Marines, Navy, Coast Guard. But at the end of the day, it's a good product, and I'm very proud of them. So you go to www.downrangesups.com and check them out and use our code.
Absolutely.
You know, and our code is LASTCALL76. So if you want to really support a great military company, this is a good company to support. And you know what? And they take care of us when we need it. I mean, Colton's running his gym up in Virginia. They're using it up there.
I love it.
And I'll tell you something. I'm very proud of this company. And the reason is when we started this off, we asked and we got it. So, hey, shout out to Downrange Supplements. We appreciate you.
Yeah, cheers to Downrange Supplements for sure. I mean, I've seen these guys coming in and look, I could probably trick myself back in the day and go, I don't know, maybe I could take that guy in the early days of UFC, back when I used to be a lean, mean Special Forces operator ready to go at the moment's notice. Now I'm much older. I see guys like, you know, some of my favorite fighters. I'll just pick on one, Nate Diaz. Not only is it, I love how he fights, I love the attitude, I love everything about this guy, right? So if his fight's coming on, I'm watching it. But I know for a fact that if he was to come in this room with a head of steam and come at me, regardless of my years of combat operations, I don't have much of a defense. And, you know, you were talking about our sponsors. I mean, I would grab, you know, Fox pepper spray, which my family, my wife uses when she goes out for a jog. And 50% of the police forces out there use this as well. It's a phenomenal product.
100%.
And, but this, I don't think would stop Nate Diaz. I think he'd blow right through it. I'd have to get that big bad boy over there to really try to put a hurting on him. And then, let's be honest with each other, that's just to buy me about 10 seconds to run out to my car and drive away as fast as possible from that guy, because these UFC guys have really closed this gap and they've become such technicians. And like you said, with the diets, with how they perform and how great they've become, it's just so much fun watching these fights. And what I found interesting in our line of work is I've watched our combatives program and special operations grow from the late 90s, which was pretty good, to something that is absolutely phenomenal now. And I know that for the military police too, this is a critical aspect of what you do, non-lethal subdues, things like that. How have you used it, in your, with military police training and overseas and some of those pieces?
Well, I think it gave the military a competitive edge.
Yeah.
It's like we had, so it was something that all soldiers could do.
Yeah.
You just had to, I guess grit it and bear it, take a little pain along the way. But I think it's probably one of the most effective things that we ever brought. Thank gosh for the Gracies who brought it in. And by the way, I think he's moving down here to Florida soon.
Oh, fantastic.
The Matt Larsons that made it great. I mean, you can even go back to our teams down there at Fort Hood that won like 3 in a row under Chris Perkins and all those guys like Chappelle down there. And, Ray Rodriguez that actually made it into the UFC out of that program. So when you look at that program holistically, I know there was a lot of controversy about it.
Yeah.
I know that. I mean, people didn't like seeing girls and guys fighting in the octagon for the finals, but I was so proud of our girls. I was like, man, you made it,
Absolutely.
And it's it kind of goes along the sense of, okay, you got a 4-ounce glove on, so it looks very violent, but we got to remember, these kids are conditioned.
Oh my
Through
gosh.
this, like every morning in PT, and if you're on the All-Army Combatives team, I unfortunately got to compete out at Fort Bliss with it, but it looks uglier than it is. If that makes sense. It's like these people are used to it. And we won so many championships out of Fort Hood and out of Fort Bliss and in the community. And it was just like everybody bought into it because it's like, you guys are so into it. I mean, even General Gillen, love him to death, one of my favorite generals in the world. He would come down there and roll with us, and he would get after it, right? Because he was such a supporter of it.
That's awesome.
Because he believed it, but then again, he comes from the special forces.
Of course.
But again, you can't say enough about a program that actually gives opportunity. Look how many people come out of that program. And made it into the UFC or other fighting networks like the Bellators.
Sure.
And then like, I don't know, I think it's IFL now or something, used to be World Series of Fighting, but it's amazing that you chose to go in the Army and you're serving your country and somehow you became a professional fighter.
Absolutely.
While you're on active duty. And a lot of times you have to get waivers and chain of command approval. But how can you be not so proud of that?
Oh my gosh, like the Tim Kennys of the world, I'll tell you, on the Green Beret side, it was amazing.
I mean, over there, 5th Group, right? I mean, it was like the thing. And then you go to Fort Campbell, man, an amazing team.
They did.
It was awesome.
And what I love about the programs, even just at the unit level, you get somebody that went through basic training, they come to your unit. If you want to figure out where the warrior spirit's found,
100%.
It's found on the mat. Even if you don't go pro, the first time you roll, the first time you start to get trained in this, your confidence goes up, your ability to think like a warrior and get that warrior spirit's there. And I'll tell you, it's not stuck with just the military. Anybody can do it. If you want to find a way to kind of shock your life back into something that's interesting, build your self-confidence up or do something, find a local MMA gym or something that gravitates to you. I don't care what age you are. I don't care what you think. I'm telling you, if you just go do it, you're going to awaken this warrior spirit in you, which is so cool. We saw it when we would train Iraqis or Afghanis. These guys would start with, like, what are we doing again? And by the end of it, they would have an absolute ball. And then when we would show UFC fights and things downrange on the AFN Sports Network when we were down there, they would all just stack the rooms up. It was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, yeah, like the boxing smokers and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
But even when we brought up the MPs, right, that's what our job was. And Jessica over here on the camera, she was involved in that. We had to go out every day and make sure these police were trained so they could do their job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and we used a lot of that combatives training at the time. We had even Jay Sapal. He was big getting into MMA at the time, right? Good kid, right? Still to this day, I talk to him. But it just took over the world there for a while. In the Army and in professional sports, everybody was doing pay-per-view. So now, if you remember, it was like once a month. And get back just one more time about how great the UFC is now. So now we got the Apex. So it's like the UFC gives free fights now 2-3 times a month, and you only got one pay-per-view.
Yeah.
So there's a business model there. And when we get back to what we talked about, the fighters, are they getting paid enough? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do I think there's probably room for improvement? I'm sure.
But that organization has been constantly improving since the get-go.
They're worldwide now.
It's global. Look, I've spent a lot of time overseas, and I can tell you this. You walk around Beijing, you walk around Moscow, wouldn't recommend doing that right now. You walk around Africa, you're going to find that some of their top entertainment exports are their UFC fighters. The stands, and so, we call them the stands, it's all of those Central Asian countries. It's one of their top exports, and they love it. This is a global phenomenon. While baseball and football, for example, are something that's definitely U.S. or Canada-centric, I would say that what I really love about UFC is it started up in Colorado, and it started as this kind of, I don't want to call it fringe, but it was sort of this idea, and it's turned into this global reach, worldwide. Everybody loves it. They all tap into that warrior spirit, which is really cool. And hey, look no further than China. When they have a top Chinese fighter fighting in the UFC, all eyes in China, and that's a lot of eyes, are staring at the fighter, the Joe Rogans. I mean, it's amazing what's going on out there. So that's really cool. So I appreciate the education on it, because I'm probably like a number of other folks out there. I don't know all the details. All I know is that, A, don't get in a fight with the dude with cauliflower ears, because he's going to beat you up. And B, if he is coming at you, make sure you got your Fox pepper spray ready to go to escape. Not to win the fight, to get away before it all goes. And then the last piece is we used it as a way to kind of help our partners, our Iraqis, our Afghanis, these other folks, get their warrior spirit up, figure out how they were going to be able to not only become better in non-lethal ways of helping their countries, but also build their confidence up, which is really cool.
Right. And, in closing on that subject, I want people, the big takeaway, because I know someone's going to disagree with me, that.
Of course.
Everybody disagrees with everybody.
They're supposed to.
But I think the reps are a lot of the issues. So, like a UFC fighter, if you want to stay relevant in the UFC, you got to fight at minimum of 2 times a year. Yeah. If you're healthy. Right. You're not on, some kind of suspension. And when I say suspension, just like medical or whatever. Not right. But some active guys that say get in there like Chimaev right now, for instance. I think he's fought 5 times, and Gilbert's like the only one that's put any damage on him. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you fight 4 times and risk losing 4 times and get cut? Or do you go back and do a full training camp? And I think this is where the issue comes from the fighters, because then we can only fight 3 times a year. Right? Even though there may be supplemental income or what have you along the way, supplements, other t-shirt companies other than Venom Kid if you're outside of that, or brand marketing yourself. But really at the end of the day, you can only get 3 true fights out of the year. And you might do a short notice, right? If it's a catch weight, and a catch weight just simply meaning, for those that you don't know, if he's a 170er and the other guy's a 185er, then we'll run it at 180 for the good.
Meet you in the middle.
For the good of everybody.
That's right.
But other than that, though, realistically, I think that's the issue, really, what it comes down to. It's a pro football player. If you were to break it down at league minimums, he's got to play 20 games, a couple preseason games, and then I think it's 17 now with a bye. Yeah. So it's about, really only comes out to about $48,000 a game if you play them all and you're on the league minimums and you're on the rook deal. You're the walk-on special, the long snapper, or whatever that requires. God bless him. So I just want everybody to think about what I'm saying, though. It's like, I don't think it's a lack of pay. I just think it's the way the game has advanced so much, and you don't want to lose your job and go in there and blow 3 in a row. Yeah. And then you're on the cut line. So what do? You go back and you hire all these training partners. And you get the best dietitians in the world, and you practice your weight cuts. How does it feel to lose this? Yeah. And then you do all those cool things, and you invest all that money in there, and then you start to look at the 12 and 12, and that's where the fighters probably are coming in. It's like the expense of doing all that.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, and I know we can't solve it here today. No. And I want to pick this conversation up as we keep going on, because I find it fascinating. But there's one thing I am confident in, is watching the progress of UFC from when it started to today. I have no doubt in my mind it's constantly evolving, it's constantly improving, and I have a strong suspicion it's only going to get better, and they're going to figure that out too.
And they're getting there, and I think another thing is, when you look at it from the business side, you got to put on I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, they put on like almost 45 shows. And
Yeah,
then
that's amazing.
Dana kept all his employees and built the Apex so they could fight. They went to Abu Dhabi and had that fight over there.
Yeah, I saw that. Was great.
So he's got 400 plus dudes on his roster and dudettes, right? And
That's great.
And he's got to keep them all fighting. So
Yeah.
so there's a budget there on their end too, and they don't put on any crazy like weak production. I mean, when you watch the UFC,
Oh, it's first class.
yeah. So we'll leave that one here for now.
Perfect.
And hopefully we touched on a few things though, at least from an idea perspective,
Yeah.
like how you might approach that later. Dana, nothing against you, and nothing against you fighters. I promise. I'm not trying to get in that.
Oh, we're representing all sides
All
here,
sides.
and what we've recognized is it's growing, and it's a conversation that needs to keep happening. If there was an easy answer, we would have had it already. But I am confident they're working towards the right way. So I appreciate the expertise. It's a great insight. Thank you so much.
So Seth, get back to our last conversation. So I did some training over there in Iraq with the Iraqi police, and then you said a few things where you were working with commandos and had to work with some Iraqi police yourself. So if you don't mind, you share some experiences of that with us and the audience.
Well, let me tell you something. I will absolutely do it. I've got a story that will absolutely blow you off your chair. I like to call this one the Ballad of Adel Mashadani. He's the Tony Soprano of Baghdad, and this story is a wild one. So grab yourself a Blanco cigar, because that's what we smoked when we were down in Iraq, and they do a phenomenal job of sponsoring us here. Kick back, because I think you're going to really dig this story. So I'm going to take it to 2009, and why that's important, and you probably remember this, but leading up to 2009, the U.S. was in charge. We would call the shots. If we got intel that there was a bad dude, we'd get after it. And the Prime Minister was sort of following our lead on this, Prime Minister Maliki. Well, in January of 2009, we handed over control to the Iraqis. So now the Iraqis were in charge. And this is kind of key, because that means we needed warrants to go out and actually prosecute targets and get after some of these guys. Now look, in that 2003 to 2009 time period, the Green Berets that I was talking about earlier today, we started to build these special operation forces, and there was two kinds. The first were the Iraqi Special Operation Forces, the ISAF. I'll talk about those guys another time. They were amazing, but think about national level special operations guys. They were super. And the other group that we got after were the Emergency Response Brigade. These were the national police, since you're asking about police. And these guys, we also trained up to this really high-end, super SWAT level work, and we would go out and serve all the high-risk warrants with these guys. Sunni, Shia, Kurd, they didn't care. If there was a problem, we would roll. Now, look, make no mistake, when we first started training these guys, it was rough. It was the gang that couldn't shoot straight, because these guys that we grabbed were shopkeepers, college students, bankers, dudes off the street. We had to bring them in. You may as well have been playing Here Comes the Clowns behind the first couple of years of working with these guys, because it was a wild scene and they were just running around. But by 2009, this was probably one of the best urban assault forces on the planet. And the reason was they had spent the last 6 years going out night after night hitting targets. Every single night we were driving Humvees to a place. Every single night we were fast roping off of helicopters onto targets with these guys. They could do just about everything that we could do, and they were brave and they were awesome. And the funny thing about these guys too is when we first pulled them off the streets, they were either really thin dudes or they're like, say they're big chubby guys. As the years went on, they started looking more and more like us. They started weightlifting with us. They started getting blown up. They were wearing the baseball hats with the curved brims. They would start to get tattoos. Metallica was always playing, Slayer, all these things. And then pretty soon, you'd look at them and go, oh my gosh, are you dipping Copenhagen right now? And they'd be like, hey, Shaku Maku, mother effer. And that was how they would greet you. Shaku Maku means, what's up, in Iraqi street slang. And of course, mother effer needs no explanation of what that is. So these guys have gotten really good. And look, we lived with these dudes. We trained with them, we bled with them, we met their kids, we knew their families. Like, they were as close to us as any other unit that's out there. And we would rotate in and out every 6 months to 9 months between 5th Special Forces Group and 10th Group. Those Iraqis were in there every single night. So every time we'd come back, we'd get to see their improvement. And they had gotten really, really just next level. I mean, phenomenal guys. And I love these dudes. I love them on a personal note because a year before, there was this big battle down in Basra called Charge of the Night. And the short of the long is, myself, Prime Minister Maliki, a couple Green Berets, we got ourselves in big trouble. We got surrounded by the Iraqi militias. We had the Al-Shut River on our back, and we were about to get overrun, and the Iraqi Special Operations Force and the Emergency Response Brigade came in and saved us. They saved my life. They saved Prime Minister Maliki's life. It was a big deal. It was a turning point for the Iraqis. And there I met a guy named General Noman, who was in charge of the Emergency Response Brigade. And this guy was a character. So first of all, if he didn't know you, he'd pretend like he couldn't speak English. He could speak great English. And since we were buddies from Basra, he'd always pull me aside and be like, "Oh, Major Seth, why are these generals talking to me?" I'm like, "Why don't you just tell me what you want? Like, I'll tell you if the general's cool or not. Like, it's okay." But Noman was one of those guys that loved to tell a story. So we were on one mission in Basra, and we dodged, I think, 2 or 3 IEDs. By the time I came back a year later, he was like, "Do you remember the operation? We dodged 12 IEDs. And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, no, man, 12, whatever it is." You know, the story would get bigger and better. And then he always understood the power of social media and of the TV. He took this idea of Cops, the TV show that was here in the States, and he had a camera crew that would roll with them. And when we take down high-value targets, you may as well have been playing bad boys. And then here comes Noman, and here he comes with the guy. And it was great because Iraqis lived in fear.
They did.
And when they were able to watch this TV show of bad guys being brought off the street, it brought down some of the risk. They felt more confident in their government, so it was a big deal. So, now I'm there in 2009, February, and I'm the operations officer for an organization called Special Operations Task Force Central. We ran all the special operations in Baghdad all the way to the southern tip of Iraq. So that's a lot of training, especially in Baghdad, which was a killing field for the last few years up to that point. Now, there we lived in the Radwania Palace complex, which is this huge palace that sat on top of the hill right by the airport there. And every night, if there was a break, we'd go to the roof of the palace, and you'd grab a Blanco cigar, and you'd kick back with your feet up, and you would watch tracer fire and RPGs flying across the night sky in Baghdad. It was wild. And so that's what we were doing. And every night, there would be between 4 and 12 operations, and I was basically the orchestra conductor. So I'd have all these flat screen TVs in front of me, and there would be teams out throughout this entire area. We had 22 teams, both Special Forces teams and SEAL platoons, and their Iraqi partners out hitting targets every night. And so what I would do is I would move assets. Like, all right, we've got a Predator over here. I need to move it. That mission's complete. I'm going to move it over here to this one and make sure everyone's got what they got. You need an AC-130 gunship? Fine, they're finished here. We've got targets over here. Move the AC-130. And that was my job. So every single night, that was it. And I was a night walker, which means I would wake up about noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, lift some weights, eat something, and then I was on shift till the sun came up the following day. So 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when the teams would come back, I could go to sleep, and it was 7 days a week, and this was a 6-month grinder. Every night. There was no breaks. There was no salsa dancing at the embassy. It's every night we were getting after it. So, the story of Adel Mashadani. One morning, 0400, my boss comes in, the battalion commander for SOTF Central comes in and goes, "Guys, I got a hot one. You Prime Minister just called General Austin, the current SecDef, but he was the 4-star in charge of Iraq at the time. Prime Minister Maliki wants us to go get a guy named Adel Mashadani out of the Fadl neighborhood. So, and it needs to happen fast." I'm like, "All right, boss, no problem. You got it." Meanwhile, I'm processing these things, and I'm like, I don't know who Adel Mashadani is, but I knew Fadl neighborhood's a problem. Why is it a problem? Well, 2006, 2009, Baghdad came apart. It used to be a mixed city of Shia and Sunni. There was so much killing and violence during that time period and ethnic cleansing that the city came apart. And west of the Tigris River were the Sunnis, and east of the Tigris River were the Shia. It wasn't like that before. For hundreds of years, they were mixed. until this violence started, and then everybody went to the different side of the river, except the Fadl neighborhood. They were on the east side of the river with the Shia, and it was all Sunnis there, and they were not budging. And they weren't budging because nobody could get in there. It was such a crazy place. It's the oldest neighborhood in Baghdad. And to put context on that, Baghdad has been around since before 1300 AD. So this city, or this neighborhood, I could best describe as an Escher drawing. You know those drawings where it looks like the staircases are always going up and you're like looking at them and it makes your brain turn into a pretzel. You're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Well, that's what it's like there. The streets are too narrow to get Humvees or gun trucks up because they were built well before anyone ever thought about cars. Everything's crammed in there together, and the architecture looks like a Tim Burton movie. It's bizarre. Everything's shifting and moving. You're like, oh my gosh. Every time for the previous years, the Iraqi army or police tried to get into the Fadl neighborhood, they were just pushed out. They would take casualties and get shoved out. So I knew Fadl was a problem. The streets were called Mohallas because it's like a maze.
Yes.
So I'm like, okay, Fadl's a problem. But who's this Adel Mashidani guy? So my intel officer comes up and goes, okay, you watch The Sopranos? I'm like, yep. I go, this is Tony Soprano of the Fadl neighborhood. I'm like, really? He's like, oh yeah, he's got a lot of enemies. Obviously now to include us. I'm like, well, tell me about this guy. He's a Sunni, but Al-Qaeda hates him. They tried to kill him back in the day with a suicide vest, and now he's got scars all over his face and body because they detonated the suicide vest next to him, didn't kill him, and this guy kept trucking, and he killed all the Al-Qaeda guys. So this guy's like almost like a Kaiser Sose. I'm like, okay, what else do we know about this guy? He goes, well, besides being a super gangster there, he's got a girlfriend in every building, and he's super paranoid. So he doesn't carry a cell phone. He spends every night in a different location with a different girlfriend, and he's a ghost. So we're going to have a lot of problems finding him. So I'm looking at the graphics going, God, every piece of news I'm getting is bad news. Because I'm thinking this is going to be Black Hawk Down times 100. These Iraqi brothers of mine, the Iraqi Emergency Response Brigade and the Special Forces teams with them, are being ordered by the Prime Minister to go into this. I'm like, okay, what is the good news? He goes, well, the good news is there's a U.S. unit, a squadron, that's there that actually talks to him all the time. I'm like, oh, fantastic. Let's go talk to those guys. So we don't even go to sleep that night. Hop in vehicles, drive over to talk to this squadron commander and his guys. And I'm optimistic. I'm like, this is going to go great. Sit down with them, and it did not go great. The squadron commander, we lay out, hey, look, Prime Minister Maliki says we have to grab this guy. And he stops us mid-sentence, which was impressive. And he goes, guys, I don't think you understand Mashidani. He's actually a good dude. He's totally misunderstood. I think if you got a chance to know him, this. And he's like, this commander's not listening to us. He's like, I got a plan called Shui Shui. Little by little, I'm turning things around here. And I'm like, hey, Colonel, we have to come in here and get this guy. And I understand when we pull Mashidani out, since they all love him in this neighborhood, it is going to kick off a hornet's nest of violence that we haven't seen in a long time. But he's not listening to us. So we agree to disagree, and I told him, look, you need to call higher because General Austin's going to tell you to do something about it because we're being told to do something about it. So we leave, and now I'm bummed out again. I'm like, all right. When I get back to the palace, the two Special Forces teams, there's a guy named Matt and a guy named Capo. They were the two captains. They bring me the plan. The plan stunk. It wasn't that they weren't good at planning. They were great at planning. Noman was with them. He's like, this is the plan. This is the best we can do. And they were right. It was the best they could do. But it was going to be an absolute bloodletting. Because what would happen is you'd send these Iraqi National Police ERB, or Emergency Response Brigade SWAT team guys into these tight Mulhallas, this maze. They're going to get shot up by a bunch of gangsters. And now you're not trying to get this guy. Forget the fact that we don't know where he is. But now you've got to get all your guys out that are injured or dead.
100%.
Which I don't know how that's going to happen. So I'm looking at this plan. I'm like, this plan doesn't work. Now, luckily for us, we had some friends over at Delta Force, and I said, hey, can you come take a look at this plan? You guys do high-risk things all the time. Their planners came in, and it didn't get much better. They go, look, the only thing we would add is maybe you can come in some helicopters at the top, because the second you do that, you're totally exposed. You can't bring in close air support because you're going to kill a bunch of innocent civilians. They go, the best thing you can do is you got to find this guy. You have to figure out where he is, track him wherever he lives and goes. So they said, hey, look, you need to get this thing. I'm just going to call it the thing to make sure I stay within classification. But they're like, if you can get this thing, this device, close to Mashidani, it will be able to pull in enough information that's going to help you find him. I'll leave it at that. I'm like, oh, great. Hey, this squadron commander meets with Mashidani all the time. So we go to give him the thing. And we tell this commander, we go, look, we've got all the dials set perfectly. We're putting it in your ammo case. Just don't touch it. And when you come out, we'll take it from you, and that will be that. He goes to the meeting, and now I'm feeling good again. I'm like, because if we can get this, we can pinpoint him, we can pluck him out. There's no problem. Commander comes out, gives the device over, and the technician comes to me, and he's almost in tears. I'm like, what's up? Then now the technician knows what's on the line. He goes, somebody turned all the dials on this thing. Like, everything's been turned and pushed. And I go back to the commander. I'm like, what happened? He goes, I don't know. Like, and look, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying that he touched it. All I know is that the thing didn't work. Now, meanwhile, the prime minister is standing on Maliki is standing on General Austin's neck. And he's like, listen, you need to get him. You've got like 48 hours to go get this dude. And I don't have a plan, except that we're going to need a lot of body bags for this thing. Well, if you know anything about the Iraqis, you know that the most important and the most dangerous guy in their unit is their intel officer. The intel officer is important because when under Saddam Hussein, they were the guys that were running insurgency against Saddam Hussein, and they're known dudes. And whether you're an Iraqi general or you're a street hustler, the intel officer is a scary dude. And the emergency response brigade's intel officer, I'll call him the Deuce, was a scary dude. When he'd walk in a room, you could feel the temperature change. Well, he and I worked together in Basra the year before. And so he calls me up and goes, listen, I got a plan. I think I got something for you. And he goes, good news. You know, he's got a bunch of girlfriends. There is a girlfriend he has who hates him that he keeps calling up and saying, hey, baby, I want to get back together with you, all these things. And she hates him because he's got a bunch of other girlfriends. You know, a story that goes back time out of mind, right? He goes, I think she would be willing to work with us. And I go, look, we have to get Mashidani out of Fadl neighborhood, because if we go in there, we're all going to get butchered. And he goes, all right, well, let me work it. So he calls me back and he goes, okay, look, she'll do it, but it's going to happen quick. And we just have to be ready to go. I'm like, okay, perfect, let's do it. So we call this the honeypot, right? So this is Operation Honeypot. She's going to go out there, and then we're trying to lure him out of the Fadl neighborhood, out of the maze, so that we can grab him. He goes, okay, let me run it. I'll let you know when you need to be ready to go. And I trusted this Iraqi so much that I'm like, you got it, buddy, no problem. I go to sleep that night. Next morning, I wake up at noon, go to the gym. All of a sudden, my battle captain comes running in and he goes, hey, sir, it's going down now. I'm like, really? And my battle captain, Clint Spiegel, great guy. Shout out, Roll Tide. He's a lawyer in Birmingham now. I rip off my earphones and go running into the jock. Phone's ringing. It's the Deuce. Hey, listen, there's this huge traffic circle right outside the Fadl neighborhood. If you think like the Champs-Élysées, you know, a massive traffic circle. We are standing in the middle of it by the big statue or whatever in the middle of it. She is standing by the side of the road. She has called him, and he is going to bring her $500. And the gist of it was, hey, look, I'll get back together with you, but I got some money problems. Can you help me out? And so he's all excited to get back with his ex-girlfriend, and so he's going to come give her money. So I'm like, this is super. Now, the Deuce is also standing in that traffic circle. He's working like 3 phones, one of which is to me. I'm like, okay, this is great. What's the plan? Up on the big board, up on the big screen, there's the traffic circle. And it's packed because it's like noon, 1 o'clock. There's got to be 70 vehicles in this thing, and they're slowly moving through traffic. And you're like, okay. And I see her, somebody gets a laser pointer, there she is, there's the Deuce. And he goes, look, we'll call you when we see his truck come in. Now, meanwhile, Capo has got what I call Assault Troop A, and they're sitting below the traffic circle on a road. A whole bunch of Humvees lined up, and that's the A team, man. Those guys are awesome. They're the most trained pipe swinger dudes. They're our go-to guys. But to always be redundant, we have the B team north of the traffic circle, and that's Matt. Matt's a really intense dude. He's awesome. But Matt had some of the B team players. A lot of energy. Still working on some of the discipline, but there are guys and we're working on them, right? I'm like, okay, I feel like we're in a good spot. All of a sudden, radio squelch breaks. Hey, he's here. Red truck, red truck. And I'm looking at there, it's black and white. I can't tell what's red on the ISR, but they can see it. And Capo calls, he goes, listen, Assault Team 1, go. We can see him, let's go. First vehicle goes pulling out, boom, gets hit by a city bus. They're stuck. And we're like, oh no. Capo, very cool, goes, Assault Team Bravo, go. Launches these dudes down, and all of a sudden you just see all these tactical vehicles come screaming down like Mad Max. They're blowing through this traffic circle, even though it's practically stopped. They're coming over the middle of this thing and going, and as they get close to the red truck, they throw what I can only describe as a cloud of flashbang grenades, which, if you've ever seen a flashbang grenade, it doesn't shoot shrapnel, but it's this big concussive burst that goes off that stuns you. So they throw all these in the air, and they start landing around all of these cars, and you see side windows blowing out, windshields blowing out, places going crazy, and these dudes come pouring over the top. And then I see which one's a red truck, because they're pulling this guy. They didn't open the door, which they could have easily done. They pull him through the side window, and then they throw him in the back of a Humvee. And the next thing you know, they turn, I get a radio call, we got him, go, 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 go. Away they go. Now, I'm like, this is amazing. We've got Mashidani. This is awesome. Now, one of the things I failed to note before was that squadron that sort of had responsibility for the Fadal neighborhood, after we got the thing back and it didn't work, those guys stopped answering my phone calls. They were blowing me off. They wanted nothing to do with us. They were ignoring reality that this was going to happen. So I pick up the phone and I call that dude, and my counterpart, the ops officer there, I go, hey man, you know, this is coming. But some lieutenant picks up the phone and I go, hey, I need to talk to Major so-and-so. And he goes, yeah, he's not available for you. I'm like, okay, cool. Hey, just let him know we caught Mashidani. We're bringing him back to the airfield right now, and you're about to have a hellstorm come down on top of you. If you need anything, let me know. Did you get that message? Yeah. I'm like, cool. Click, hang up. Count to about 5. Phone rings. Now it's my major counterpart in a panic. I'm like, I told you this was happening. And sure enough, if you look up Adel Mashidani or you look up the Fadal, F-A-H-D-I-L neighborhood on Google, or just searching on whatever, you're going to get all these news stories all lined up. That place went bananas. About an 18-hour riot breaks out. And they start going crazy. They captured 7 Iraqi police officers as hostages and were saying that they wanted to do a prisoner swap with Mashidani. Meanwhile, Mashidani comes back to where we were, and there's Noman waiting for him. Camera crew already there, cops music playing, pulls Mashidani out. I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. It's already on TV.
Photo moment.
It's the photo moment. We are making it happen. There he is. It's all going. General Austin is over the moon. Everybody's all excited, and these guys were great. Now, one of the questions I asked early on was, hey, what does Prime Minister Maliki want with Mashidani? Because the best I could tell, Prime Minister Maliki was just annoyed by this guy because he kept making him look bad. He kept embarrassing him in the news and other things and saying bad things about the Prime Minister. And what General Noman, who's awesome again, but what he tells me is, listen, they're just going to arrest him, throw him in jail for like 6 months, maybe a year, cool his heels, teach him a lesson, and he'll be back on the streets, and that'll be that. I'm like, oh, this is great, this is super. Except that's not exactly how the Iraqis roll. About 6 months later, they put him on a kangaroo court and they hung him. And so that was the end of Adel Mashidani. It goes back to teach a couple different things. The first is, when I look back at what was important during that time period, is we built this really incredible force. And why is that important? Because we would leave 2 years later. The Americans would leave in 2011. And ISIS exploded. The storm cloud exploded in Syria and came tearing across Anbar and made it all the way to the gates of Baghdad. And the units that stopped ISIS cold from taking Baghdad were General Noman and the Emergency Response Brigade and the Iraqi Special Operation Force. And they were the ones that went and turned and pushed them back through Anbar, destroying most of the cities as they were fighting through with American firepower. If you ever see the TV show Chain of Command and Nat Geo, they could do a really good job of capturing it. But with the brave Iraqis and our technology and air power, those units were the ones that turned around and destroyed ISIS. And they finally put a grave marker on them in 2017, 2018 up in Mosul. We've been cleaning them up ever since, but that was the final end of ISIS. And it was those shopkeepers, those bookkeepers, those college students that we had picked up off the street in 2003 that volunteered to help their country were the guys that came back. But the real thing that breaks my heart on it was those guys that we trained that went out and got these guys took about a 75% casualty rate fighting ISIS. It just mowed them down. It was a total meat grinder for these guys. But it was inspirational in the sense that when you talk about, hey, people that are willing to fight and die for the country, those Iraqis were, no kidding, superheroes. And from a Green Beret standpoint, when you talk about, hey, what's the trophy in your trophy case? It's not, hey, man, we grabbed a Del Mashidani. It's not it at all. Like, that was just another operation we did because we would do 4 to 12 ops a night. The trophy in the trophy case was the Emergency Response Brigade that we built, the Iraqi Special Operation Forces, the guys that saved Iraq after we were gone. Those are the things I'm most proud of. So when you ask, hey, I realize it's a long answer to a short question, have you ever worked with the National Police? Oh yeah, I love those guys. Amazing guys, not just because they saved me, because I saw what they were able to do. So
I think though, what's so interesting about it is there's so many people that think that it was so bad over there, like, you know, just the civilian population of America. And they think that we were like almost fighting Iraqis all the time. But when you look at the big picture, you just tell a great story that it's like we were actually training the good people of Iraq to be ready for that counterinsurgent attack that came its way. And and those guys that you train, that is a trophy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you with Jessica, our producer, myself, that it was a trophy when we rebuilt a police station.
Of course.
Because you know what? You're already there. You're already away from home, right? 12, 15 months in your case. I left to go to the academy, I think, at like 12 months. But it's a feel-good story, especially when we don't always glamorize things in a way like, oh, I went to Iraq and I'm this and I'm that. Look, everybody knows your rank.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what you did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's not about you, man. It was about them.
And it drives me crazy because you hear a story like that, or you see Jess and we're doing this here on this project, and we're telling a good story, and none of it was about you, and none of it's about me.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just get around, and it doesn't matter what you do or where you're at. Everybody's got to always like, hey, I was this, I was retired this, I was that. It's like, look, man, I know who you are. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
And I love the proudness of it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there's a time and a place for it, you know? And you just hit it right on the head for me. It's like, it wasn't about us. It was about going over there and training them to take over their country so we don't have to go back again, right? And that's what it's all about, Seth.
And it was.
Cheers, that's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I would say that for the squadron commander there, he wasn't wrong. I'm sure his shui plan, a little by little, to turn things around would have worked over time. We got orders, man. We have to go. And we had to do what we had to do to protect those amazing Emergency Response Brigade Iraqi heroes from getting butchered in the streets of the Fadl neighborhood, which was wild. And you know, when you talk about, you hit a great point. You know, we talk about the high-end special forces and special operations, SEAL Team 6, Delta, these guys. What they do is they take out the leadership so that the rest of the enemy, so that we can build out these institutions. They buy us the space and time. We all work together. There's no competition. They're all complementary efforts. We all do different things. My Special Forces group, 5th group, could not build a Iraqi military police force presence nearly as well as you and Jessica.
True.
Right? I mean, we all had our role to play there, but at the end of the day, it was always about the Iraqis getting the Iraqis. So I will give them a big toast and a phenomenal thank you for everything that they have done. It's just, I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story. I've got way too many of those stories. I promise the next one will be shorter, but it'll still be interesting.
But in the closing thing on that is it provided us safety as well, though. And that's the biggest takeaway. It's like if we train them and then we get in some stuff over here, well, they're going to be there for you too, and they're going to fight alongside you. You know that, and that's that camaraderie you see.
Well, on the that's a great point. At the strategic level, what makes America's military amazing is our partnership with our alliances, with all of our friends that are out there. Whether it's the Iraqi government, the Saudi Arabians, the Emiratis, the Colombians, you fill in the blank, right? That's what makes us great. That's the thing that Russia and China doesn't understand. They're very parasitic in how they treat other countries. We treat other countries like friends. Friends fight. Sometimes we don't see eye to eye, and sometimes we don't have the same values. But I can tell you, our strength isn't just because we're awesome here. Our strength is we have awesome friends overseas. That makes all the difference. The General Nomans, the ERB guys, all the Iraqi Special Operation Force guys, they're all amazing folks. So to them, cheers.
This is the most important part of our show. This is the salute table that we created here at Last Call 76 to honor those men and women that do amazing things for us. And this week, our salute is to those down working the hurricane in Fort Myers and Venice. Amazing people doing amazing things. Our National Guardsmen, our first responders, as well as our FEMA personnel and any other person that are volunteering as far as civilians. We really appreciate it. We know it's tough. This is a terrible thing that's happened to us. But if we work together and stick together, we can get through this. Seth?
Our beverage of choice that we salute those first responders with today, it's Horse Soldier Bourbon. And the reason we selected Horse Soldier Bourbon, it's because it was created by first responders. The ODA that you've seen in 12 Strong and you've read about in Horse Soldiers that were the first responders into Afghanistan after we were attacked in 9/11. Not only do they make a magnificent bourbon, they've got a wonderful restaurant called Urban Stillhouse I would recommend folks go to. These are veterans-owned businesses, and it's the highest quality, so highly recommended, but that's why we chose this drink.
Here's to you.